All right, folks, let's dive into some seriously wild facts about World War II that'll blow your mind. Trust me, some of this stuff is absolutely insane. So first up, let's talk about the casualties during the final push in Europe. Between June 6, 1944, that's D-Day for those keeping track, and May 8, 1945, when the war in Europe finally ended, the Allies lost 200,000 soldiers. 200,000 men dead in less than a year. That's just the killed in action numbers, by the way. And if you think that's brutal, get this, 550,000 Allied soldiers were wounded during that same time period. 500,000 guys getting shot, blown up, or otherwise mess up on the battlefield. When you add those numbers together, we're talking about 750,000 casualties in under 12 months. The scale of destruction is just mind-boggling. Now here's something that really puts things in perspective about how rough the fighting was. By the time D-Day rolled around, 35% of German soldiers had already been wounded at least once. Yeah, more than a third of them had already taken a bullet or caught some shrapnel before the Allies even invaded France. But wait, it gets crazier. 11% of German soldiers had been wounded at least twice. Think about that, getting wounded bad enough to need medical attention, recovering, going back to the front lines, and getting hit again. That takes either serious dedication or serious bad luck. 6% have been wounded 3 times. 3 separate times these guys got hurt, patched up, and sent back into combat. At what point do you start thinking maybe this isn't your war? 2% have been wounded 4 times. 4 times! Most people wouldn't go back after the first time, but these guys kept going back for more. And here's the kicker. Another 2% have been wounded more than 4 times. More than 4 times. Guys, that's not even bad luck anymore. That's just statistically improbable. These soldiers were basically walking targets who somehow kept surviving. Now let's talk about the sheer amount of destruction the Allies were dishing out from the sky. Between 1939 and 1945, the Allies dropped 3.4 million tons of bombs. Yeah, you heard that right. 3.4 million tons. That's not the number of bombs. That's the weight of all the explosives combined. Let me break that down for you because the math here is absolutely crazy. That means on average, the Allies were dropping 27,700 tons of bombs every single month for 6 straight years. Every single month. Can you imagine that much firepower being unleashed constantly? But here's the really heartbreaking part of the bombing campaign. Over 100,000 Allied bomber crew members died in the skies over Europe. These weren't guys on the ground getting shot at. These were airmen flying missions, getting hit by anti-aircraft fire or attacked by enemy fighters, and never making it home. Flying in those bombers was basically a death sentence. The casualty rates for bomber crews were absolutely devastating. Now here's something that'll make you do a double take. The American 45th Infantry Division, a legit U.S. Army unit, had a swastika as their shoulder patch symbol. Yeah, a swastika. Before you freak out, let me explain. See, the swastika wasn't always associated with the Nazis. It's actually an ancient symbol that's been used by cultures all over the world for thousands of years. The 45th Infantry Division, which was made up of troops from the southwestern United States, originally used it as a Native American symbol of good luck. Makes sense given the region they recruited from. But obviously, once the Nazis adopted the swastika and turned it into a symbol of hate and genocide, that became a problem real quick. So the division changed their insignia. Can you imagine the awkwardness of fighting Nazis while wearing their symbol on your shoulder? Yeah, that had to go. Now let's jump back to the very beginning of World War II, specifically the Pearl Harbor attack. Here's a fact that sounds like it came straight out of a dark comedy. At the start of World War II, during the Pearl Harbor attack, the title of the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Navy was abbreviated as SINKUS. Okay, that doesn't sound too weird on paper, right? But here's where it gets hilarious in the darkest possible way. The pronunciation of SINKUS was SINKUS. Think about that for a second. The guy in charge of the entire U.S. Navy had a title that literally sounded like Sink U.S. Right when the Japanese were, actually trying to sink the U.S. fleet at Pearl Harbor. You literally cannot make this stuff up. Some poor staff officer probably pointed this out after the attack like, hey guys, maybe we should change this title because it sounds really bad right now. I mean, imagine being a sailor hearing about orders from sinkers while your ship is literally sinking around you. The irony is almost too much to handle. Needless to say, they changed that abbreviation pretty quickly after Pearl Harbor. Sometimes reality is stranger and more darkly comedic than any fiction. Now here's a fact that shows just how brutal Hitler was to his own military leadership. 84 German generals were executed by Hitler himself. Not killed in battle, not died of natural causes, straight up executed on Hitler's orders. Let that sink in. Hitler had 84 of his own top military commanders killed. These weren't random soldiers or civilians. These were generals, the highest-ranking officers in the German military, and Hitler had them executed. Why? Well, as the war turned against Germany and things started going south, Hitler became increasingly paranoid and unstable. He started blaming his general for every failure, even when those failures were directly caused by Hitler's own terrible decisions. If a general questioned Hitler's strategy, lost a battle, or even just happened to be nearby when something went wrong, they could end up facing a firing squad or being forced to commit suicide. Some of these generals were executed for being part of assassination plots against Hitler, like the famous July 20th plot in 1944. But others were killed just for retreating when any sane military commander would have retreated, or for telling Hitler the truth about how badly the war was going. Hitler didn't want to hear reality. He wanted yes-men who would follow his orders no matter how insane they were. This created a terrible situation where German generals were more afraid of Hitler than they were of the enemy. They'd make military decisions based on what would keep them alive politically rather than what would actually win battles. It's one of the reasons Germany's military effectiveness fell apart in the later stages of the war. The whole thing is a perfect example of how dictatorships destroy themselves from the inside. When your leader's executing 84 of your top military minds, you've got serious problems that go way beyond just fighting the enemy. So there you have it, some of the wildest, most unbelievable facts from World War II. From the guy whose title literally meant sink us during Pearl Harbor, to an American division that accidentally shared a symbol with the Nazis, to German soldiers getting wounded so many times they should have bought lottery tickets, to Hitler executing nearly 100 of his own generals. World War II was full of these bizarre, tragic, and sometimes